Welcome to the show. Today we have Paul Wyld, who is the author of a fantastic new book, Jim Morrison, Secret Teacher of the Occult, A Journey to the Other Side. Paul, first, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to actually write this book?
Sure. I'm a singer-songwriter myself and an artist.
Oh,
I've loved the Doors, my whole life. I love Jim Morrison. Um, I moved back to Los Angeles in 2016, Boston, and all of the 50th anniversary stuff related to the Doors was going on at that time because they were active between 65 and 71 when Jim
mm,
Morrison died, and just always had a kind of like a lifelong love for Jim Morrison, the Doors, for his poetry and his lyrics and the music. I've always thought, like everybody else, it's special. I mean, there's rock stars, and then there's Jim Morrison, just a really mysterious figure. And you know, I like everybody else have always wondered why, had that feeling that he's more than a rock star, that there's something going on here that's more than meets the eye.
yeah.
So when I got back here, I was in a place where I really wanted to explore the occult. I really didn't know much about it, and was at a point in my life where I was open to learn about it. Like I studied history and literature in college, and been a writer for a long time and all that. I found a book called The Secret Teachers of the Western World by Gary Lackman. And it's a history of what's called the Western esoteric tradition. And it's about secret teachers. These are people who are they're open to that unseen other reality, and they have such a strong connection to it that they come to a point in their life where they have no choice but to overcome their fears about what other people are going to think um, about their connection to this reality, and that they have to find a way to express their connection to that other reality. A lot of times they hit persecution and all kinds of roadblocks. There's lots of victories too, because a lot of people feel that same thing, but they're the kind of person to remind us in that time in their life at that point in history that there's more than like three-dimensional reality that we live in. And there's a whole long um, story and history behind all of that.
Mm,
The more that I read this book, the more I realized like Jim Morrison is one of these people, and that's why I chose the opening poetry quote in his book, in my book. Um, Reality is what has been concealed from us for so long, and it dawned on me that this person dedicated their life to overcoming that concealment, to opening that up to us. And once you start to dive into this and to look into this, you realize like, wow, like we really don't, um, in the popular sense, we really don't understand Jim Morrison that well until we look at his life through the lens of the Western esoteric tradition. And the Western
absolutely.
esoteric tradition is just something that it's like a gigantic river with all kinds of tributaries coming off of it that are all artistically and intellectually and spiritually rich, with lots of traditions and history behind that. And Jim Morrison spent the first, well, definitely in high school and college, with his wide reading, he was diving into all of this stuff. And then when I discovered that on a YouTube video that I found about a college roommate of his that was auctioning off a book that Jim Morrison had given to him for the Christmas 1963, I knew something was up. It was Kurt Seligman's The History of Magic and the Occult, which is basically one of the first, if not the first, account of the Western esoteric tradition. And it basically follows the same path as Gary Lackman's. Now, first of all, Gary Lackman is awesome. Like, he was very generous to me and very supportive, just a really amazing intellect,
Mhm.
a very gentle, sensitive person. Um, I loved his book. It had an enormous impact on my life and led to writing this book. He was one of the founding members of Blondie. This is a funny story. I read a book by
Incredible.
him years ago when he called himself Gary Valentine. That was about moving to New York and meeting Debbie Harry's boyfriend.
Mm,
And as I was communicating with him, it kind of dawned on me that that this book stuck with me. That this is the person that I was talking to. It's like, are you Gary Valentine? He's like, yeah. So that was pretty. So when he was with Blondie, In 1975, um, at one of his band members' apartments in New York, he found Colin Wilson's The Occult, which was published in 1971. Here, Jim Morrison passed away. And it's also an account of Western esoteric tradition. It had a very deep impact on Gary Lackman, and was one of the big reasons why he became an occult writer himself. So when I found this YouTube video of Jim Morrison's college roommate, his name is Ed Martin, auctioning off this book, like all kinds of that just sparked me. I knew that there's a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got this book and I read it, I realized that this is something that, first of all, he got the book from the branch library in Alexandria. He was probably a junior or a senior. He was at Alexandria High School in Virginia.
Wow.
And he kept it, never brought it back, whether or not he, liberated it from the library or brought it back, checking out, who knows.
I think we might be all guilty of that at some point in our lives.
Yeah, exactly right. We've all done that. From reading this book, I just was just struck at what I was reading. This was the book that really helped Jim Morrison clue himself into who he was, who he might become. And I'm pretty sure that book had the same impact on him that the occult had on Colin Wilson's The Occult had on Gary Lackman, and that Gary Lackman's book, The Secret Teachings of the Western World, had on me. So I could see that. Now, there's another book that Colin Wilson wrote called The Outsiders. Okay. And it's his first book. He's an English writer. And Colin Wilson was fascinated in this book with why so many of the great artists and romantics have these really high highs and these really low lows. And I realized why Jim Morrison loved this book so much is that what Colin Wilson was attempting to understand was something called peak experiences. And these artists are trying to get these peak experiences, and they become outsiders and trying to be receptive. This is an important thing to understand about Jim Morrison, leading into everything else. Mm-hmm. There is a interview that you can find on YouTube, 3 hours of magic Morrison special, where Robert Krieger, the guitarist in Doors, talks about he was sharing a home with John Densmore in Hollywood, in Laurel Canyon. And one night they were with Jim Morrison all night, and they were trying to talk him out of committing suicide. He was just a really bad place in his mind. And Robert Krieger mentions that they had to do this several times, throughout their time with Jim Morrison. And that after doing this all night, he went for a walk around dawn, and he came back a completely different person, completely euphoric. The person that wanted to take his life, throughout the night was gone. And he came back with all the lyrics for People Are Strange, the melody already in his mind.
Wow.
This is a story that is similar to what Colin Wilson presents in The Outsider. He talks about artists like Van Gogh. Like Van Gogh, Colin Wilson says that The Starry Night, this really famous painting, is an artistic depiction of a peak experience. Somebody's having this incredibly high in which the world is. We all have. I believe that's what John Steinbeck talks about this in East of Eden. That there's a quotation in my book about that called "Having Like Your Glories," in which we feel this strong connection to the world, in which we feel that everything is beautiful, everything is in sync, everything is aligned, and the colors of the world, the air, the feeling, it's all really vibrant. You're really in connection with that other reality, right? And a lot of Van Gogh's paintings express that. And then a year after he painted this painting, he committed suicide, and he left a suicide note that read misery will never end. This is very similar to Jim Morrison and his outlook on life. On An American Prayer, his poetry album, we hear one of his attitudes about how he sees life. And he says, could any hell be more horrible than now and real? So Jim Morrison was very much, he was a secret teacher in the romantic sense. As a romantic, he was someone very strongly connected to that other reality, but he also experiences very high highs and low lows that made him suicidal. This is an important point to understand about Jim Morrison. It places him in. He's a secret teacher, like all the others throughout the Western esoteric tradition, which is back thousands of years. But he comes to us in the form as being a romantic poet, much in the sense of how Colin Wilson was talking about an outsider. So that's a very important thing to understand about Jim Morrison, and it doesn't come
Yeah.
across. I don't find that in any of the biographies. I
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah, one thing in your writing, which you do a really great job of storytelling.
Thanks, that's an honor.
Yeah, but your reference work is incredible as well. You reference a lot of incredible books constantly. I found myself having to stop and write them all down, just to kind of keep up and make sure that I can kind of go back and check those out also. I mean, the length you went to kind of research Jim Morrison's life was incredible, man. And as somebody that read the book, I appreciated that. And I
Thank
think
you.
you gave a lot of really cool new insight. And honestly, as somebody that grew up like kind of listening to rock and roll, I'm ashamed that I wasn't more into the Doors, but now after this, I 100% am. I mean, I was jamming them all morning. So,
Nice, nice.
yeah.
So with the music, what's absolutely amazing about Jim Morrison is that, like all creative artists, true creative artists, he was just really astute in um, seeing that rock and roll could be a new artistic art form to express what he felt he was born to express, like his connection to that other reality. And he saw that like rock and roll's primitive roots um, could also bring him a platform in which he could bring out the side of him that was had everything to do with being a shaman, a kind of modern shaman on stage. And when you look at his life in 1965 when he graduates from UCLA, I mean, this is a person, if you met him, like he wanted to be an experimental filmmaker. Like he was ready to go to New York to work with Jonas Mekas, considered the godfather of film, and that's what he told his college girlfriend, Mira Werbelo, that he was going to go to UCLA to realize like his fantastic, weird, crazy visions on film. That's where he met Ray Manzarek, who's getting his MFA in film, also at UCLA. So,
Interesting.
Jim Morrison was very much an artistic person who was very interested in the avant-garde. Like he could not stand Hollywood. He had a friend, Bill Cosgrave, who wrote a really good book about him. It's called Jim Morrison, Mary and Me, which he was trying to sneak into the Academy Awards one night. And Jim Morrison's like, "Why do you want to go there, man? Hollywood is just here for the masses. Fuck all that. Check
Yeah.
out like Contempt by Godard, and like he loved French New Wave film. He was into that kind of stuff. So in 1965, when he graduates, he has a painful breakup with Mary Werbelo. Um, and then he just moves down to the beach and he lives under the pier. He's not going to, decides not to go to New York City. He said in an interview that he couldn't see himself taking care of like film equipment and all that kind of stuff. I also think it's because in New York City, you're going to have to get a job and a place to live because it's cold, right?
Yeah.
It's not an
Quite
environment where you
different.
can
Yeah,
just be
quite
like,
different from California.
yeah, right. Like you can like be a beatnik bum, so you ruled that out. He's not going into Hollywood. He's not going to get a regular job because his mind just demands his time to write. So he's on the beach, and that's where so in No One Here Gets Out Alive, he tells a friend from FSU, like, he's like, fuck it, let's start a rock. But it was not that casual when you really look into his story. Like Jim Morrison was a lot like all the other secret teachers, where he really asked himself, like, how am I going to fit into this? What is my place in society? Like, what is my place in this world? Like,
Yeah.
I'm refusing to go do all of these things. And I'm this immense spiritual person with this message that I feel like I'm born to get across. At the same time, I want to do it artistically because Jim Morrison had like, tons of style to him, right?
Hmm.
So he saw rock and roll as a way to do that. And he runs into Ray Manzarek, 2 months later on the beach. So he's 21 years old and, he's already written about 7 or 8 of some of the best rock songs, you've ever heard. I mean, he might have not played an instrument, but I realized like this person is every bit the musician as everybody else is. He's hearing these songs. It's a lot like how I realized it's a lot like how Mozart, said music came to him, but just kind of like marched into like, out of his right brain into his left brain and kind of took it down. That's something like what Jim Morrison said. He said he just envisioned a fantastic rock concert. and that he was just taking notes for that's that's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
He just has all of the attributes of someone who was a secret teacher, who was very artistic, and who it was not easy being Jim Morrison at all. Like he really had to stake his claim to be himself. That's why he dropped all these like
Well, yeah, I
awesome
can't imagine
comments.
coming from the family that he did. You touch on that quite a bit with his father being in the military and um, being referred to as the commander.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say in all of his comments in his interviews, someone who you can tell after a while they have spent a lot of time thinking about how to fight back to be themselves. And but to talk about Jim Morrison's family, first of all, to talk about Jim Morrison, all these various areas, it's amazing how at length you can go. I really hope my book kicks off all kinds of other people to write other stuff about Jim Morrison. This person is just so incredibly interesting. But regarding his
Hmm.
family, his father was an admiral in the Navy. He was a commander of an aircraft carrier, the USS Bonhomme Richard. He got that commission when around the time that Jim Morrison was going into CLA. So, I mean, that in itself, we have to remember that an aircraft carrier in the United States, like that's America's like premier um, symbol of power and imperialism and projection of strength around the world. There's
Yeah.
only 10 aircraft carriers. To command one is a very, very elite group of people. And you have 3 or 4 thousand people under your command. This is Jim Morrison's father. He had an understanding. Jim Morrison had an understanding of power. Um, and also, his family had a long tradition of service to the Navy. His father, in an interview, says that he recognized that his son didn't have any interest in the Navy, that he was artistic and drew pictures. There's a good interview on YouTube about this with his sister, and that Jim Morrison was just really into reading books and all of that. And his father hoped that he would, after college, he was going to Hollywood and all that. His father was really shocked that he became a rock singer. He told him like, so apparently Jim Morrison called him up one day and said, I'm in a rock band. His dad's like, you're crazy. You don't have any talent for that. And he tells him to go get a job. It's pretty funny. So with Jim Morrison growing up, the Morrison household was not abusive. It was just a military household. They moved around a lot, so Jim Morrison really couldn't maintain friendships for too long.
Mhm.
So it was just his sister and his brother. He read a great deal. He started reading a great deal um, at the beginning of his junior high school years in Alameda, California. Then they moved to Virginia. So his father was away at sea a lot. He expected him to kind of like be the man of the house. And I think Clara Morrison, his mother, did the best that she could. You have to remember, like Clara Morrison married a military man. She did not marry an artist.
Yeah.
And then look at the intensity of who Jim Morrison was. So I'm sure it was a difficult, mother and son relationship. And when Jim Morrison graduates, he doesn't. His sister mentions that he doesn't ask for a car or a trip to Europe or anything like that when he graduates high school. He wants a complete set of Friedrich Nietzsche's books. And 17, 18 years old. That's a very unusual ask.
Yeah.
And I realized that in my research and write that in high school, that's when his spiritual awakening starts. That's when he begins to really, really become aware of that other reality. And no one here gets out alive. The kind of behavior that Sugarman and the other writer, he co-wrote it, Jerry Hopkins, write about is indicative of someone going through an intense spiritual awakening, sometimes even a rapid spiritual. One of the books that I found
Hmm.
is called The Stormy Search for the Self by Christine and Stanislav Grof. It's probably the best book on spiritual awakening that you can find. And their case studies of the people that they work with, including Christina Grof's own like testimony about what life was like for her when she went through a spiritual awakening, matches with the kind of behavior described that no one here gets out alive. Like his behavior is like bizarre and it's strange. His first girlfriend, Tandy Martin, her mom, tells Tandy Martin like, "Stay away from him. He's unclean." It's like there's just something wrong with him. And plus, and then he's doing everything that he can to make time for himself to read. Like tells the teacher one day at school, I'm going off to have a brain tumor removed, and the teacher buys that walker. She calls the Morrison household that night, like, how'd the brain surgery go? Like, what are you talking
That's a
about?
wild, that's a wild
He's,
one.
yeah, I know, right? Like um, he's asked to join like the most popular fraternity in school and just flat turns it down. That's not typical for a teenager. When you're a teenager, you want to belong. Being on
Yeah.
your own is it's painful. For Jim Morrison, it wasn't. His IQ was about 149, so he was able to put little effort into school assignments. So he graduated with like solid B average from high school, and spent most of his time reading and reading a lot. I mean, he would and a lot of like he went to the Library of Congress, was checking out books in 14th, 15th, 16th century demonology. He was going to
Wow.
all these out of the way bookstores that um in the late 1950s, were considered, just really taboo, and finding them around Washington, D.C. to find, all these obscure titles about all these like really, complicated subjects as well.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine
And
how
he
hard
was
it
just
was to find that information back then. And like to have that drive to even want to find that. Super interesting.
right.
At that age, to have that type of spiritual awakening around 17. Wow. I mean, it's
If you
incredible.
go into any, yeah, exactly. It is. It's breathtaking actually when you look into it. And when you, if you go to any, like the occult section, the self transformation section, I think they call it at Barnes and Nobles, like around the
Hmm.
country, and you can find all kinds of books, and they all advocate the same thing. Like, read as many, if you're going through spiritual awakening, read as much as possible, read as the best spiritual books as possible, keep a journal,
Hmm.
write, draw all these things. That's exactly what Jim Morrison was doing in high school. He drew, he was inspired, he drew a lot, very interesting drawings that started in junior high school. And he also journaled a lot. He was inspired by Franz Kafka. He kept journals, to do that. So as he was reading, he was writing down everything that he was reading and thinking about it carefully, noting what other people were thinking about as well, life all around him. And he did that consistently throughout high school and throughout college. So by the time he graduates from UCLA, this person has an immense understanding of himself. Like, you know, your average 21-year-old male graduate out of college is not anywhere near that kind of level of self knowledge.
Yeah, not at
And
all.
and on top of that, his intellect, I began to realize, was had the maturity of a 35 to 40-year-old PhD. He writes notes on vision, the first part of the Lords and the News Creatures. He wrote most of that in college, and a lot of it contains a lot of references, in there to alchemy and its relationship to experimental filmmaking, and a lot of other references about history and American urban history and shamanism. And the way he writes about it, it's just not it's not typical for someone that age to be able to wrap their mind around something like alchemy. That's a very difficult subject. And I think he was inspired by that and discovered that through the history of magic and occult. He loved Alexander the Great, and he
Really?
kind of like, yeah, modeled his look after him. He read about him immensely. And Alexander the Great was also the son of a military leader, Philip II of Macedon. Alexander the Great also had for his teacher Aristotle, and it was Aristotle who taught him that all human beings have a strong desire to know. We have an innate, strong curiosity, and that stuck with Alexander the Great. And after the conquest of Egypt, he wanted to found a city that would, be dedicated to a place where human beings can come and, honor that drive to know. And Alexandria became like the great learning center of the world for centuries, and that's where the great library was built. That's a place where Jim Morrison, I mentioned the book, would have felt right at home. He was that kind of person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just, I'm not saying Jim Morrison's like, Alexander the Great reincarnated or something.
No, but I
It's
mean
just,
the impact that he had on culture at that time was immense. I mean, I couldn't even imagine being around that time. I'm kind of going back through some of his music now that with the Doors and a lot of the poetry and the spoken songs and American Prayer, man, it's amazing stuff. And I'm just like, I can't believe it's taken me this long to get into it. He is an incredible artist and songwriter, poet. Uh, I mean, I've been really enjoying digging into it after reading your book.
Well, I mean, I just like a lot of people discovered Jim Morrison in high school. I mean, I was an '80s kid, and all we had back then were like the records, and no one here gets out alive. Maybe you got lucky, you found a VHS tape at Blockbuster Video that was, kind of an average documentary about the Doors. So now, I mean, I'm 54 years old, dating myself. When I came back to LA, I realized like I became a Doors fan all over again. So there's just so much that you can find on YouTube. There's so many amazing new photographs, and you can listen to all the music practically free on your phone.
Hmm.
And then when I found Gary Lackman's book, I started to do all the research and everything like that. And I was even more blown away now, later in life, that this person that like is now half my age. I'm amazed. I'm
Yeah.
amazed that somebody so young could understand so much and be so wise. His friend Phil Lino said that he had a very, very old soul. He was very wise beyond his years, but at the same time, he was a very immature incarnation. So you've got like this person who is a secret teacher like that, very learned, very educated, very artistic, very expressive, really astute, articulate, right? And then you just have this person who kind of reminds you like the poet that he loved, Arthur Rimbaud, like, the French, punk boy poet that wrote all of his great poetry by the time he was 18, 19, and then disappeared off into Africa.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, Rimbaud has a huge influence on like Patti Smith and Bob Dylan. He had a huge influence on Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison wrote a letter to Wallace Foley, who was a professor at the University of North Carolina at the time, who uh, came up with, well, wrote a whole great translation of Rimbaud's works that Jim Morrison said he carried around with him all the time.
Wow.
He wrote Wallace Foley a letter thanking him for that. And then Wallace Foley wrote a book, comparing him to Rimbaud called, The Poet and the Rebel. It's a really good book. So that's great that Wallace Foley did that. Yeah, so you got this person who was, you know, who could be just a real gentleman, real polite. And then there's another side of him that Ray Manzarek called Jimbo. He would just explode into craziness.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I bring up also the book. He had a
Absolute
had a
animal.
Dionysian, yeah,
Yeah.
he had a Dionysian archetype, and people with Dionysian archetypes, like it's a lot to contain, man. Like finding a they need to be rock stars. They need to find
Yeah.
something to to express themselves. Oftentimes, people with Dionysian archetypes, they're murderers. Like
Oh,
Manson, Charles
holy
Manson is
hell. Yeah.
he's a Dionysian archetype. I met this writer who's got this best-selling book right now called Chaos. Charles Manson, the CIA and the Secret History of the 1960s. Tom O'Neill. He writes about Manson's possibility that he was an MK Ultra, created, type person while he was in prison.
Yeah.
And I learned recently that Jim Morrison knew Manson. Now Neil Young
Really?
thought Charles, yeah, Neil Young thought,
Holy
um,
hell.
yeah, Neil Young thought Charles Manson was a genius and was trying to get him a record deal. And
Wow. Yeah, Charles
and
Manson has music out, right? Like,
I've never
um,
heard it. I can't find it.
man, I have one time I was with somebody that was bringing it up. I assume it was him playing. I mean, it was a while back, but yeah. I mean,
And
yeah, I think it's on
came across a
Spotify.
story on Spotify. I'll have to
I think
check
it
that
could be
out.
on Spotify. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. But yeah,
I
sorry.
mean, Tom told me about like what it's like to talk to Charles Manson on the phone,
Mhm.
and I got the impression that he probably had to like take several showers after that.
Yeah, I
um,
can't imagine, man.
so there's a story where Jim Morrison was friends with Dennis Wilson, and one day Dennis Wilson saw that he had Charles Manson in his Mustang, and apparently Jim Morrison was driving into producer Terry Melcher's house, and Dennis Wilson got really freaked out by Manson being in his car and didn't Jim Morrison after that. But I'm pretty sure that story is probably true.
Holy cow. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty
So
wild.
Charles Manson represents like the dark side, the real dark side of the Dionysian personality. See, what's amazing about Jim
Yeah.
Morrison is that he had enough self-awareness and sense where, because the highway killer, the motif of the highway killer comes up in Jim Morrison's songs a lot in his poetry, and
Hmm.
because he realized that that's a very unique, American character, right? Like he
Yeah.
kind of like he loves the beatniks and the hitchhiking around and all that. He said that if he hadn't read Jack Kerouac's, On the Road, that the Doors would not have been possible. But Jim Morrison like inflects, his own Dionysian character into this whole beatnik persona that also has a side of him that's very dangerous, like that could be a killer. You hear
Yeah.
that on American Prayer. When he talks about coming back from the desert, he's on the phone with somebody. It's like, hey man, it's out in the desert, killed somebody. I don't think anybody's gonna find out about it. It's just this real
Yeah.
darkness. But Jim Morrison sublimates that, into art. He does that in his film,
Yeah.
An American Pastoral. That's the difference between Morrison and Charles Manson. I
Yeah.
mean, Chaos is an amazing book. Read it. There's a lot of, Tom Windows he wrote like the best book, I think, about MK Ultra because he does it responsibly. I mean,
Yeah.
he paints a picture where it's quite possible that Charles Manson was just handled, to become someone to get other people to commit murder. It's possible.
Really. Damn.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out.
And I came across film festival that was showing Lawrence of Arabia back in 2017. Lawrence of Arabia came out in 1962, won 7 Academy Awards. It stars Peter O'Toole. This is the same year that Bob Dylan's first record came out, and the same year that the Rolling Stones were born.
Oh wow. Bob Dylan's one of my favorite songwriters. I mean,
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what they do with that film.
oh yeah,
Film
yeah, comes out on Christmas. How do you feel about
Mhm.
that? Do you think it'll be
No,
accurate?
man, I love Bob Dylan, and I'm sure it'll be a good film.
Mm.
I'm sure the effort was made to get it to come up with a really good artistic, vision of his life. But I just like, Bob Dylan is mythic in my mind, songs and
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, that would
I
be
think
he would be an
both.
extremely hard artist to kind of capture like that, I feel.
Oh yeah, like this is someone who goes to New York City. He lands here on January 24th, 1961. He's like 19 years old. He's got his guitar, no money. It's like it's below freezing. He just goes like 9 months later, he's signed to Columbia. He goes and
Man.
he makes it a point to go find Woody Guthrie and finds him in Bellevue, the mental asylum. That's somebody I realize like these early rock stars, like we love them for their music and all that, but we
Mhm.
love them because man, they just knew what to do at so young an age. They
Yeah.
just got it like really young, and they just had like the bravery and the gumption just to go for it, just to go do it.
Yeah, I
Like
mean, and
Bob Dylan's
especially
like
at that
epitome of
time,
that.
yeah, at that time it had to be an extremely hard decision to make to kind of jump out and try to make a living doing that,
Jim
especially
Morrison loved Bob Dylan.
oh really?
When Ed Martin, the guy that he gave the history of magic and to in college, like he very excitedly told Ed Martin to come inside one day and listen to Bob Dylan's albums. Yeah, because Jim Morrison's a poet. Like he loved words every bit as much as Bob Dylan did.
Yeah.
He was his name was Robert Zimmerman, right?
Yep.
And he called himself Bob Dylan after his favorite poet, Dylan Thomas.
Oh, gotcha. Oh.
So with Lawrence of Arabia, that comes out in 1962.
Okay.
I knew that Jim Morrison saw this film because the themes of that film and the dialogue in that film matches a lot of Doors songs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, am I seeing things? Am I hearing things? I went back and saw the movie again. I'm like, I think Jim Morrison has seen this film. And then to go back to Colin Wilson's The Outsider, he talks about T.E. Lawrence, who was leading the Arab Revolt between 1916 to 1918 during World War I. So Jim Morrison was familiar with that. He knew the story already because he read the book. So I concluded that, well, if he's familiar with Colin Wilson's The Outsider. That means he read all about T. Lawrence leading the Arab Revolt. That means he's going to be curious about this film. And I just from this is about someone who was a lot like Jim Morrison in real life. T. Lawrence was a medievalist. He read a great deal, felt like he was born to free people. He does that, in Lawrence of Arabia. He leads the Arabs, to freedom during World War One. We it's amazing. We just saw a rebel leader take over Damascus in Syria, Al-Jalani. And that's exactly what Lawrence of Arabia is about. Lawrence of Arabia he's the rebel leader. The Arab he gets the Arab tribes together and they march on Damascus. They take over Damascus. And that's where the movie ends.
Oh yeah.
Like we were just seeing everything repeat itself again. Just this film comes out in 1962 and it just sets the whole tone for the 1960s. This is T. Lawrence is an average, British lieutenant who wants to get out of his boring, army life. He wants to go out into the desert, and he ends up, uniting the Arab tribes, and they love his bravery and his fighting adventurism and all that's the stuff that culture honors. And he dons the white keffiyeh and the outfit that he has, and he has his blade and everything like that, and he's charging people into battle. Then this American journalist comes along, and everybody wants to know who T. Lawrence is. He takes all these photographs of him, and he becomes famous throughout the world. He's practically the first rock star, right? And I think Bob Dylan and Mick Jagger and David Bowie like that too. I think that film and T. Lawrence's life show them the possibilities of what they can do in creating another persona. And I think that inspired Jim Morrison as well. And then I was able to confirm that he did watch that film closely when he was at film school in UCLA. The person that confirmed that, they wanted to remain anonymous. But I think Lawrence of Arabia inspired Jim Morrison a great deal. It's almost the same story. Jim Morrison comes to a desert region and he becomes somebody else. He dons the whole Lizard King image with the tight leather pants and the leathers that he wore. That's to signify the reptile, like the serpent that goes things that are very, very old. Jim
That's
Morrison
a pretty interesting name. So he chose that himself, right?
The Lizard King?
Lizard King, yeah.
I think so.
Oh,
yeah,
very cool.
He says at the end of one of his songs, I am the Lizard King, I can do anything.
Yeah.
But he's doing that. He appropriates this image, to wake us up. I mean, you can't go to a door show and get instant light. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So Jim Morrison understood that his type of personality, who he was, he could jar the audience awake. That's why he loved Antonin Artaud so much, the French actor who invented the theater of cruelty and all that, because he wanted to connect to the audience, to jar them out of their complacency and make them feel uncomfortable. And that's what Jim Morrison knew how to do on stage. When he was at FSU, he acted in a play called The Dumbwaiter, so he already had a dramatic sense. This is what's very, very interesting about Morrison. Is this is somebody who could open up on stage and be dramatic this way, yet at the same time, this is a very inward-looking person. I mean, poetry is a very private act, right?
Yeah.
It's just you in paper, like if you're a painter, it's just you and your paints. With a film, it's just you and a group of people, for a time making a film. But when you're in rock and roll, you're open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
You're on tour and anybody can come into a show. So he just opens himself up this way. That took a lot of guts.
Yeah.
That I realized that took a lot of guts. We do learn in No One Here Gets Out Alive, and it kind of comes out in the Doors film that it takes them a few months to finally turn around to the audience and open up on stage. Jim Morrison was very ambivalent about being a rock star. You can read in his poetry that a person who felt like he might have wasted his life, pissed it all away, American music, which myself is going to be remembered. This is somebody who could have been a professor.
Yeah.
His girlfriend during the Doors, Pamela Corson, she just wanted him to just be a writer. She's like, I just want to live with you at home and you write your poetry and you paint. I love this side of you. But Jim Morrison was born to be on that stage. And if you want to take a look at it from an astrological perspective, he had a Leo North
Absolutely.
node. I mentioned this in the book. And if you have a Leo North node, like, so we have these nodes in us, the North and the South node. Your
Okay.
South node, in a general way, is your comfort zone. That's the place that you're used to being. If you work from your South node comfort zone, you'll probably get success, but you're not going to be the happiest of people. It's because it's going to be like, it's not really a challenge.
Yeah.
It's not too fulfilling. You're not doing what you're here to do. And that would be for Jim Morrison, that would be Aquarius. And Aquarius South Node, that's all about, community, wearing a uniform, the fire department, the police, the Navy, like his dad.
Yeah.
So if Jim Morrison had followed his family's footsteps, the tradition of going to the Navy, he probably would have been very successful. Following the footsteps of his dad would have like laid out the whole path. And I'm sure Jim Morrison thought about it.
Yeah.
He could have been president of the United States. He would have been a politician after being that, gone farther than his dad. But that's not, he had so much self-awareness. He knew not to go down that direction. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So with his Leo North Node people, they're born to be in the spotlight. There's Mick Jagger, Mick Jagger, he's a Leo sun, then he's a Leo North Node also. Like he has so many things, contained in him that makes him Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
I
It's
went
just
to
in
this,
him.
like I went to go see the Stones for the first time this summer. Saw them twice. I had to go again like
Wow.
2 days later
Yeah.
here in LA, and to see this 80-year-old man running around stage entertaining 70,000 people like he was 20 years old. I'd never seen. I knew the show was going to be good. I didn't think it was going to be one of my favorite rock shows that I've ever seen. So with the
Man.
difference between Jim Morrison and Mick Jagger's, like, Jim Morrison was always kind of naturally kind of chubby. When he was in Venice, like he was doing so many drugs, was just starving. He lost all that weight, but it wasn't sustainable for Jim Morrison to stay that way. That's why he kind of becomes like pudgy later on. Whereas with Mick Jagger, he was slim his entire life,
Yeah.
and his father was also a phys ed teacher. So it was, you know, kind of like he was nurtured into being a person that to value taking care of yourself. Like if you go on YouTube, you can see like Mick Jagger's workout schedule. It's insane. The guy's in the gym 3 hours a day.
Yeah. I mean, to
You know,
be still running
I
around like that at that age, I mean, you got to be. I see Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead still doing that type of stuff, working out multiple times a day, or trying to at least stay active. Um,
yeah.
I mean, when you're traveling like that all around, I can imagine the wear and tear on your body. So I was gonna ask, so from his spiritual awakening, like around that age of 17 to when he kind of decided to start a band or lead a rock band, how long was that period of time when they kind of really took off with the Doors? Because he seemed pretty young when the band was huge.
It didn't take long at all. Everything in Jim Morrison's life happened very fast. There's a
Wow.
person like, decades of living, in between 1965 and his tragic death in 1971. So he graduates from UCLA in 1965, tells Ray Manzarek he thinks he's going to New York, I talked about, decides not to do that, moves to the beach in Venice. That's when this is a really big part of his life because he's taking copious amounts of LSD because you can buy it over the counter for free. Not for free, well, you can buy, well, it's legal. It's made illegal on October 6, 1966, 666. And he's doing all these other drugs, tampering with his like nervous system, all this kind of stuff, like to break on through the side. Like he sees drugs as a way to just blow open those mind forged manacles.
Yeah.
He runs into Manzarek 2 months later, like we see in the film or like read in the books, like he sings Manzarek's the song, Manzarek is blown away, and they form a band. And they begin to hit the circuit, throughout 1966. and then their first album comes out in the early part of 1967. So they were only together for about a year and a half
Wow.
from the time that Jim Morrison had this thought until that first album comes out. It's about a year and a half. Pretty
That's
amazing.
pretty, yeah, that's extremely quick. Yeah. That's
I mean,
especially
I mean,
for the time period. Um,
so the 60s, talk about the time period, like the 60s, when you familiarize yourself with Western esoteric tradition, you realize that this 1960s was the world's first popular occult awakening. I mean, when Colin Wilson landed in San Francisco in the early part of the 1960s, he's like, wow, like America is discovering like yoga and the occult and magic. And there's all this kind of stuff going on. There's these new bookstores everywhere that, just maybe 70 years earlier, get you thrown in jail.
yeah.
100 years before that, get you sent to the stake or, tortured, anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, so this is the first time that so many people were getting into all of these things. And there's a whole history of that in modern times. Gary Lackman has a great phrase that people were getting interested in that which is new, alien, other. So Jim Morrison, being who he was, it was very mysteriously, synchronistically, the right time for him to emerge, to express himself, because so many people were ready for someone like Jim Morrison. He
Yeah.
represented everything that they wanted to do in coming in contact with that other reality, the unknown, whether they're exploring witchcraft or magic, or alchemy, or all kinds of experimental things going on, like beatniks with language, and
Mhm.
Jonas Speaks and like experimental film. Everybody was just doing all kinds of new things across the whole spectrum, intellectually, artistically, spiritually. And Jim Morrison understood all of this. He
Yeah.
gave all of this very
I
thought.
think it takes like an open mind like he has and that type of knowledge to be able to catapult like that, like you said, so quickly. It's just an incredible story. With how like his actual rise to fame. Do you think like that type of knowledge had anything to do with I guess his rise?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He understood, he knew things about life at a young age that most of us don't really realize until like later on, like 30s, 40s,
Yeah.
50s. He was pretty wise beyond his years. Like he knew or had a sense of how to appropriate, who he was. And I mentioned this in the book is that the beginning quote that Kurt Seligman chooses to open the history of magic and the occult is by Albert Einstein, where he says the fairest thing that we can experience is the mysterious. Jim Morrison's a deeply mysterious person. He understood that about himself, and he knew how to appropriate that in his music and his performances with his, when he was with his shamanism and everything like that. He knew that, and with the way he looked, and he knew how to appropriate that. It's a combination of his natural gift for like mysteriousness and for eratism, and he knew how to project that in a very artistic way. He loved Hieronymus Bosch, like a lot of when you look at his paintings,
Yeah.
like the Garden of Earthly Delights and all of that. Like Jim
Hmm.
Morrison looks like something that pops out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting.
Yeah.
He understood this kind of stuff. He loved like to go back to Alexander the Great. You know, the secret teacher has like a mission, to point us to that other reality. And Jim Morrison went about that, and when this I think this contributed to like his fast rise with the Doors, is that he went about that with the same kind of warrior-like intensity that of Alexander the Great, in the spiritual sense. In the
Yeah.
spiritual sense, like Jim Morrison was every bit like his dad, a leader this way, just in his mission to wake us up to this other reality. That's why
Yeah.
Jim Morrison's on stage. He like screams like wake up. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to break that circuit. I talk about this in the book with Colin Wilson. He writes about this too. Like we're trying to to break the circuit, to snap us out of that part of us that's like asleep.
Yeah.
What he calls the robot. And Jim Morrison understood that as well. There's a very strong relationship between Jim Morrison, and Colin Wilson, and Gary
Huh.
Lackman too. I think these these
Yeah.
three these three have a lot in common. I think if Colin Wilson um, was in his early 20s and rock and roll broke, I think he'd have been a rock musician himself. He even says there's a quote somewhere that I would have loved to have been like a musician, but I'm a writer instead.
Yeah.
Because his ideas, his Colin Wilson's ideas are so right down the line of what so many rock musicians, the good ones, want to express. But yeah, like his rise to fame, there is just that his fast rise to fame. There are so many different factors, so many different elements that are all really fascinating into why that occurred. Now, this isn't someone who said to himself one day, like, I want to be a rock star because I want to get rich, I want to get famous, nice
Yeah.
house, cars, all that kind of stuff. No, this is someone who wanted to be a rock star because they felt called, like a spiritual calling, to get out there and aside from being artistic and wanting to make art, great rock music, and all of that, was to really wake people up in a spiritual sense that there's a lot more than your own, like carnal, you know materialistic desires and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's so much more about life that you can be hooked into, that is really sustaining. That's why
Yeah.
he was just not into material things. This guy lived in a hotel room. He drove around his Mustang when he didn't crash it. You know, he was just he had
Yeah,
a
what I think
his
I think you mentioned in your book that he was almost like ashamed in a way, that he was like seen as like a sex symbol, because I feel like he wanted his mind and knowledge to kind of be shown more, or his art to be shown uh, more
he
than
did
that.
say in an interview that, like, wow, like I've got to look back at these pictures, like my later on in life, these pictures, and I think
Yeah, that was
he was
it.
ambivalent about that. Yeah, he was ambivalent about that because he didn't want to be remembered as a sex symbol. He wanted to be remembered for his poetry and his lyrics and his art. That's what he wanted to be remembered. And I think because he was just so smart, so self-aware, and he understood the power of images, that I
Yeah.
think he understood how to appropriate himself in photographs, so people would get a sense that, like, of the mysteriousness about him, and which would lead them to to ask questions about who he was, about life itself, who they were. That was just going to be more than like, hey, look at the sexy dude in the rock photograph, right?
Yeah. I mean, now that you mention it, like his like the way he poses in those photos is extremely interesting and kind of does open up like that kind of questioning, something I hadn't
It's
noticed
it,
before.
it's just strange. It's like it's all at once, like devilishly rebellious and Christ-like.
Yeah.
It's he's kind of a mix of those two kind of things. So when he leaves for Paris, this is someone I think who just, for a variety of reasons, like he tells the Doors manager Bill Siddons, like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to go to Paris. There's a lot of different opinions about his mindset before he left. Some say that he was going to come back and make more music for the Doors. Others say that he felt like the Doors were finished and
Yeah.
that's it. Um, I think he wanted to go to Paris to get back to writing poetry. So he has the Miami, conviction hanging over his head. And this goes back to the very sad part of, like, the secret teacher story. This is what happened to Jim Morrison, happened to many secret teachers like him in the Western esoteric tradition, where they found the authorities just coming after them and wanting
Yeah.
to destroy them. Jim Morrison did not, like, expose himself in Miami March 1st, 1969. There are over 10,000 photographs submitted at that trial. Not one showed him doing that. Not one
Yeah.
witness could remember, him flashing the audience, pulling out his drum.
Yeah.
There was a 3-man, 3-woman jury that convicted him of indecent exposure. They dropped the other charge. It's either they dropped the charge, they didn't find him guilty of that, which was public drunkenness. And Robert Creer was like, wow, like he was actually guilty of that. He was drunk at the show.
Yeah.
And the sentencing was 6 months hard labor. And the likely place that they were going to send him was, like, Florida's, to this day, most notorious prison, which was Rayford Prison. This made Jim Morrison really nervous. When he was in Paris, he was asking lawyers and friends, like, I need some kind of assurance that if I lose on the appeal, they're not going to send me to Rayford. And of
Yeah.
course, nobody can guarantee him that. His lawyers, no one. And his lawyers are telling his lawyers were very good, like Max Fink and people like that. And they felt they had a very good chance of the conviction being thrown out on appeal in Florida.
Mm.
But I really had to walk with Jim Morrison to write this book. Like you're Jim Morrison in Paris, and you left a country with your name and your mug just plastered all over the 6 o'clock news around the United States. You're this pariah. Like after the show, Jackie Gleason, the big actor, he held a decency rally at the Orange Bowl in Miami. Like 30,000 young people came to protest Jim Morrison's performance in Miami.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people. I grew up in Miami. It's a
Yeah, it
very,
is a
very
lot. That
conservative
is a lot.
place.
Yeah.
So you're Jim Morrison and you're in Paris, and you just don't know what's going to happen to you if you go back to America and you lose on appeal. Then you're going to Rafe. You can get killed.
Yeah.
That's what happened to a lot of people like him.
For something
There's
that
a
he didn't
CB
even do. Or,
exactly,
you know,
exactly.
I mean, I would say the evidence shows that he didn't do, but yeah.
Well, 5 days after the trial, the FBI field office in Miami, they sent a memo directly to J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the very
FBI.
storied head of the FBI at the time, saying that Jim Morrison did expose himself to the audience. So Jim Morrison had an 80-page FBI file, so they were,
Yeah.
looking at him
I
for
can't
sure.
imagine like a mind like his going through something like that where you are being accused of something that you didn't do, and you have somebody like the J. Edgar Hoover FBI, coming out with a report on you.
Plus
30,000
his
people
father,
protesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Plus his dad went to the Navy and said, "Listen, I know my son is an embarrassment. Like I'll tender my resignation." That's huge. Like his father was someone who's being groomed for like the Joint Chiefs of Staff, top spots in the corporation. For him to tell them like, "Listen, I'll resign." That's that's the impact that Jim Morrison was having on society. But to get right down to it, the
Yeah.
government, it's a spiritual thing. They're just not going to have somebody like Jim Morrison with such a hold on America's baby boomers, waking them up to cosmic consciousness.
Yeah.
Because once you lose control of the narrative that controls people's minds, then you've lost control. They're
Yeah.
waking up to their own divinity. They're waking up to your own magic. Now we don't need television. Now we don't need all of these things that you think you need.
Yeah.
That's what Jim Morrison was trying to wake us up to.
I
That
I
was
love that
difficult
thought
for us.
process. I love that thought process. Why do you think, which, I mean, I'm sure there's like a hundred reasons or 1,000 reasons. Why do you think they go, I guess our government, goes out of their way to sort of hide that and kind of attack these people as they're coming up and kind of relaying this information?
Money,
Really?
money. It's the apparatus that protects people's life to make a lot of money. If LSD were legal again, used for therapy, the I'm convinced that the liquor industry would just be out of business. Like they used,
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
they used LSD, with great success on people who were suffering from severe depression from alcoholism in Canada.
Yeah.
The success was just amazing. They just never touched alcohol after that. They were able to understand, all the reasons, not why they drink, but just so alcoholism is just a symptom of deeper problems, right? And
Yeah.
LSD with the right people, like you're going to confront those things. You're going to see those things. That's going to come up in your unconscious, and it had tremendous healing ability. America's top spy after World War II, this very high-ranking officer. So the CIA tried to use LSD as a truth serum first. It didn't work, but this officer saw like how beneficial it was.
Yeah.
And he went around like dosing people. Like he dosed Cary Grant, the actor, 60 times and cured him of his like depression and everything like that. So to go back to what you're saying, yeah, it's to protect that which makes a lot of money. Just like with cigarettes,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
chemicals in cigarettes get people addicted. Put all of like those bags of chips at the convenience stores. They're right there when you go to the checkout to
Yeah.
buy it. once you buy one, like the chemicals and chips and all that, you want to eat more of them. You're going to go
Yeah.
buy more.
Yeah.
It's
Keep it.
it's all pretty sick.
Yeah. No.
In all these, in
Yeah.
all these different corporations and companies, they have their, they have their scientists who understand all these things. They just know how to make things because they know how your brain is just going to get you hooked on
Yeah.
it,
I
and it
mean,
makes
it
them a
blows
lot of
my
money.
mind. Yeah. I mean, they go out of their way to kind of keep you hooked on the wrong things, like in every aspect of your life, I feel, which kind of
Yeah,
goes to this, which thank God for people like you and other people like Jim Morrison kind of shining that light on, hey, there's another side of this world or realm that is being hidden. And I
like
don't
the
think
whole story of yes, yeah, exactly. And I think they're a big. Well, my personal view at this point is like when there's a really good book called Acid Dreams about the history of LSD, and it it's first discovered in 1938 in Sandoz Laboratories by Albert Hoffman, but they tried to experiment with it and just
Mhm.
they don't find much interest in it, so it's shelved. And in April 1943, Albert Hoffman takes it down again and accidentally doses some of it, drops a few drops on his hand. He has a very interesting bike ride home. And then he goes to his bosses and say, "Hey, I just covered something here. It's pretty amazing." Also in April 1943, this is why I opened up the book. This is the year of Jim Morrison's birth. I'm not giving
Mhm.
away the whole book, but I don't care. I love talking about this stuff. In April 1943, J. Robert Oppenheimer convenes all the scientists that are going to start with the Manhattan Project to build a bomb in New Mexico. And then, just 3 years later, Jim Morrison is in the same area around Los Alamos National Laboratory. And that's where he comes across the Native American Indians who are dying, where he says, their souls leaked into his. That whole story fits right in line with the way in which a person becomes a shaman, as I
Yeah.
understood it from uh, a book called Shamanism: Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. That book is translated to English and comes out in 1964. And I'm pretty certain Jim
Yeah.
Morrison read that.
I mean, that could be a reason of his that such an early awakening that he had at the age of 17 and kind of search for that type of knowledge. I found that an
And just
extremely part of the book, that crash with the Native Americans that they were passing.
so
If you want to go
that
ahead and
story is, yeah, that's very important. He felt that was the most important experience of his life. There's just a whole interesting background, this whole story. So Los Alamos National Laboratory in northern New Mexico, before it was a laboratory, it was a boys' school, a ranch school. One of Jim Morrison's favorite writers, William S. Burroughs, was a student there as a teenager, and he kind of relished the idea that it became a place they built a bomb later on. William Burroughs wrote Naked Lunch, and Jim Morrison loved Naked Lunch. So the story is that when General Groves, who was in charge of that, the White House put in charge of him the whole Manhattan Project, he had to find a scientist to do this. He settled on J. Robert Oppenheimer, and then they needed a place to do it. J. Robert Oppenheimer was also at that boys' school in New Mexico, the ranch school, and he remembered it. So they went out there and they visited it. They decided that this is where they want this project to take place, built the bomb, and then the government comes in and tells the ranch school, "Hey, we're buying you out. Buy this place." The natives in the area, this is all like very holy, Native American
yeah.
lands, like northern New Mexico. Northern New Mexico is really, really special. If you've ever been there, like the light is like no other place in America, probably on Earth. It's amazing. So the natives in the area had a sense that, okay, the military is doing something here. The military went to them and said, "Listen, this is temporary, and then we're going to go." Of course, they didn't. They built the bomb, and then they created Los Alamos National Laboratory to keep making bombs. That's also where America's first ICBMs were made. That whole
Interesting.
Operation Paperclip, that brought
Yeah.
von Braun over, the German
Yeah, for
scientist.
NASA.
Basically, yeah, he's the one who made the first rockets. Hitler gave him what he needed to do it, Jewish slave labor, all that. Then they
Mhm.
just decided to wipe that away and say, "Hey, come build for us. We'll
Come
get
do
you
it
months
over
of fast."
here. Man, that's a part of history that, I mean, even people I talk to day, they have no idea that that ever happened, which is, it blows my mind. But anyway, I'm sorry.
It's just amazing how extensive it is.
Yeah.
So they built like the first ICBMs there, and so it to me, to tie in the story with LSD and with Jim Morrison,
Hmm.
it's amazing that LSD is accidentally discovered in the same month and year that Oppenheimer is going to split the atom to build the bomb. It's almost as if like God
Yeah.
is like, okay, these people need something to help them along, to wake them up to the infinite, since they now have this weapon of mass destruction that can just destroy the world in 70 minutes. And when you look at all the people that took LSD, the general testimony on the whole, it's, people become Christians, they become Buddhists, they become environmentalists, they become more humble about life. Most people that my friends that I know that have taken LSD, they said they had a beautiful experience, and they see it as a significant point in their life, and they had a new view of life. I don't think
Yeah.
doing LSD is going to make you a spiritual person. I think it's something that came into existence at a time when we needed it, because now we
Yeah.
have now we have the triad, nuclear weapons from land, air, and from the ocean. And then Jim Morrison is the eldest son of one of America's most outstanding military officers, and it's just a very very mysterious and strange occurrence.
Well,
These
it is
things.
something that provides an ego death, some will say, which I
Yeah.
think at that point, maybe the country needed. I mean, maybe America actually needed that. But man, that's a super interesting time for that to both of those things to happen the same month.
And then also when this was happening, the accident with Jim Morrison, that was when Jack Kerouac was wrapping up his hitchhiking trip, that inspired him to write On the Road. That Jim Morrison said, like, if I hadn't read On the Road, the doors would not have been possible.
Wow.
So I bring up also, I compare, I think Jim Morrison is a Hamlet figure. And in the play Hamlet, like Shakespeare, basically, predicts modern man by about 300 years. The play is basically about somebody so his father is murdered in the play by his uncle and his mother, and they become king and queen. Hamlet is plunged into grief. He's like, fuck, the hell. And then his best friend Horatio comes to him and says, I saw your father be a ghost. And then they go and find the ghost again. And Hamlet has this very famous, dialogue with the ghost, probably like the most amazing moment in all, dramatic history of plays, right? Where the ghost tells him, like, your mom and your uncle, they killed me, they murdered me. Don't forget me. So now Hamlet is plagued with this sense of vengeance to avenge his father's death. But at the same time, he snapped out of his depression. He's excited. Like he goes to Horatio and says, there are more things that are dreamt of, and there are more things in this world than dreamt of in all of your philosophy. And then he says something amazing. He says, let's give it a welcome. And Horatio's like, was trying to warn him, like, look, if you go pursue this ghost, this could draw you into madness. This is the spirit world. So we have this play where there's someone who is suddenly snapped out of, three-dimensional thinking into like contact with the spirit world. Like it's an instant, it's a bowling ball of a spiritual awakening that happens to him. And he
Yeah.
decides to give it welcome. And then of course, the rest of the play is how he's going to get back that, his mother and the uncle for murdering his father. He does always like clever things, but ultimately the revenge ends in his death. You know, a lot of, it's an amazing Hamlet. I can see why Hamlet is such an amazing play. And the more I thought about this, I read Harold Bloom's book about the play, and I do I quote some from there. I like Harold Bloom a lot,
Yeah.
and I just realized, Jim Morrison's life is much like Hamlet's, in which Jim Morrison, he made the conscious decision with the spirit world to give it a welcome. He's telling others to give it a welcome. I mean, everybody back then and today, we are all Hamlet. We are all giving all of this a welcome.
Hmm.
We are now taking marching orders, from the spirit world. We have so many people who are awakening to that other reality, through like, the various ways, that can happen to you,
Yeah.
whether it's like peak experiences or the occult or witchcraft or reading or all this kind of stuff. Where suddenly, like, I had like my best friend in college. He recently had a start his spiritual awakening. He said, "I would not have been able to understand your book if this hadn't happened to
Yeah.
me." So when the spirit world comes to Jim Morrison the same way. It's almost like the Native American workers are like, they're picking, America's the eldest son of like one of America's most outstanding military officers to avenge them by taking the land to build this bomb. It's like to do everything that that we've done. You know, I had one person ask me, what Jim Morrison would have thought about the whole land, get back to the land movement. He was all about that. All of his
Yeah.
songs are all about the land and the magic of the land.
Yeah.
So that whole thing in New Mexico that happened to him, that is a deeply mysterious and very rich part of his life.
Yeah. Very profound. I mean, for him to remember that at such a young age and kind of, I can't imagine like carrying that with me as a child, you know. Were there any like messaging or kind of reoccurring symbols or anything like that in his art that really stood out to you?
That's a good question. Just the consistency of his message, like the I don't think it's so much more of like his poetry is rich. It's really beautiful. I like the
Mm.
phrase that Colin Wilson uses to describe the the body of work that poets leave, like the living quality of his work, like the beauty and strangeness of it.
Yeah.
But what I find really remarkable about his life is that he was so young, had so much self-awareness to not completely sell out to anything that was going to interfere with his authenticity.
Yeah.
Like this is someone who guarded his mind. He understood the power of television, power of media. It would be pretty amazing to hear Jim Morrison's thoughts today on cyberspace and
Yeah.
YouTube and everything that's going on. His prophetic ability was incredible. He said that he felt that in the future that the interview was going to be the major art form. And here on YouTube, that's
Yeah.
everybody's tuning into all these interviews. Like he was right about
Exactly. I mean, myself, I turned off the TV a couple of years ago. I don't really watch much unless somebody else, you know, I'm with somebody else that's watching TV, but for
it.
the
Well, I
most
mean, we
part,
have, yeah,
this type of
well,
stuff.
everybody has their phones now,
Hmm.
and everybody's out in the world, videotaping things and thinking about things and creating their channeling their channels, right?
Yeah.
And as the whole world is waking up like this, it's to the point where now the national media itself cannot contain the awakening. Look at what's happening over there in New Jersey. Like
Yeah.
everybody's
The
talking, like,
orbs.
what are these drones? What are these things flying everywhere? The
Yeah.
FBI can't tell us what's going on. And like we're beginning to see the scope of the bullshit. And the
Yeah.
bullshit is starting to crack, It'd just
Eventually,
be
yeah,
amazing.
it's harder and harder for them to conceal. Like, man,
So
especially with the internet. I mean, people being able to connect and kind of share their thoughts or experiences with each other and other things that they've learned through um, a lot of this type of research, man. It is allowing for an extremely large awakening around the world right now, and I've definitely been noticing that. I've got friends
there's an
that
awakening. Go ahead, go ahead.
no, yeah, I was just saying I've got friends that I talk to almost every day, you know, kind of about the same thing.
I think there's an awakening going around the world that just like the 1960s is like kindergarten. So that was contained to the West.
Yeah,
I mean, there are things going on around like the Western world is opening up to like Eastern spirituality, and from China and from India. Primitivism had been a part of artistic consciousness for a while out of Africa, like from modern art, things like that. But now, so the pattern in history used to be that renaissances are particular to like cities, city states, like Alexandria
Hmm.
in Hellenistic Alexandria there in ancient Greece and Rome and such. And then,
Yeah.
Italy with the Renaissance, and, Paris in the 1920s and the San Francisco Renaissance, the Beatniks. Now it's global. Everybody is connected. Like
Yeah.
I've made close friends on Instagram that I hadn't even met yet. I don't even speak their language, but Google Translate and all that makes it possible to communicate with friends all over the world. They're having conversations like we're having.
Yeah.
So suddenly it's a global renaissance that we're experiencing. I don't know how much longer things in the internet are going to be this free. I think we should enjoy every moment of this.
Oh, trust me, right now I feel like part of just shutting off the TV was starting to read more and to kind of look into things that you can actually learn about and kind of grow from. And that's been my favorite part about this whole part of the internet. Like you said, I think the more they realize how big that type of movement is, the more eager they will be to try to shut it down or clamp down on it.
There's a good book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. It's a book Jim Morrison, I think, would have read very closely if he were alive today.
Yeah,
That talks about how economics and government is going to intersects with how they watch us and how they all that kind of stuff. It's a
yeah,
it's a frightening book, but it's I think it's very worthwhile to read. I
yeah,
mean, when you think about life in China and the kind of control that the Chinese government with the kind of technology that's available now has on their population, I mean, it's a totalitarian's dream,
yeah,
to be able to have the kind of technology that's available today, and I think that's the fight going on right now throughout the West. Is, we want to be free, we want to maintain free speech and everything like that. Um, but there's it's coming from the far left and the far right. This
exactly.
the same time to contain what everybody says and to watch what everybody says, and I'm hoping that people just see through all of this altogether finally.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Because I feel like, I mean, I just see pe some people going too far one way and just being blinded by whatever side's doing their own bullshit, and man, luckily, I feel like people are starting to see through a lot of that, and especially politically.
I
And
mean, I talked about AI at the end of the book. I think AI is going to come into our society much faster than you know uh, than like like personal computers, laptops, and smartphones did.
yeah,
Just because our ability to manufacture and the the rate at which we can learn, at which AI itself can learn.
yeah,
I think because I mean I wrote my first term paper in high school on like the first Macs that you can write on home, and I wrote my book on like my 2020 like MacBook Air with the M1 chip and all that,
yeah. I
and
probably have the same
it's
one.
like the same the frame of time there was like what 40 years,
Yeah,
and I think AI is going to rise on us between 5 and 15 years. It's going to be very quick. But one thing I really feel like is like an AI machine, no matter how powerful they are, no matter how quick that they can compute like faster than the human brain, they're not capable of gnosis, instantaneous spiritual knowledge of things that are universal, both
mhm,
materially and spiritually. They're not going to be able to. They're not, they're not divine. They're not from God. They're not that. Um, so we'll I don't know, like when Elon Musk talks about singularity, that
mhm.
kind of freaks me out. Singularity
Yeah.
being
There's a
the
lot of
idea
things that
they're
a
going to
lot of
become
things that he's up
sentient and
to.
independent.
Yeah, the
when
the chip. I mean the Neuralink. I think I'm out on
Yeah.
that. I don't think I'm interested. I would
Well, I mean,
like
when
to
he
remain
he sent
human.
out that tweet, that tweet kind of freaked me out that he sent out when Trump got elected. Novus Ordo
I'm not sure I
Seclorum,
missed it.
New World Order. That's very interesting
So, oh wait,
because
say that again. Sorry. What was that?
he sent out a tweet on
Hmm.
X
Yeah.
after Trump was elected, and the tweet was just a simple Latin phrase for New World Order, Novus Ordo Seclorum. I found that
Wow.
very
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
I mean,
Extremely
that's
strange.
I mean, the closeness that he has, like with Trump, that's just, and his power and his wealth. He's a very interesting person. Like, so when when Octavian became Augustus and he was like the first Roman emperor, I mean, him and his second Agrippa, they declared a new order at that time too. Like, we're gonna take care of the Roman citizen, like cradle to grave. We're just gonna run the show.
Yeah.
Like if anybody has the power to have an effect on what the whole show is about, it's gonna be somebody like Elon Musk. He's got
Yeah.
his fingers in all kinds of pies,
Yeah, he's
right?
got SpaceX, he's got Tesla, he's got the Boring Company. They're drilling tunnels under
Neuralink,
I think like most cities right now. Yeah, Neuralink.
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I did see.
he loves to dig tunnels, man. I think that's what some you keep seeing like especially I live in Texas, so I see like see earthquakes happen quite a bit, like randomly, just not really large ones, but you just see them periodically pop up. You're like, what's going on? But a little bit of research into that, and people think that that's caused by some of those tunnels being dug
Hmm.
underground, kind of setting some of that stuff off. But,
That may explain this whole phenomenon going on around the West. People just hearing booms in their neighborhoods, not knowing where
oh
it's
yeah, it's
coming
true.
from.
Yeah.
There's a channel that I like to watch. This influencer here in LA, he calls himself Jason A, and he comes out with these really amazing videos about God. He's churning them out now like crazy because there's so much going on. Where he
Yeah.
talks about all these mysterious booms happening all over the United States and all over the world. That might have something to do with it. They're doing something underground.
Yeah. It's super. I mean, there's no telling, like, once they're doing that type of stuff, like where all that's going. But
I mean, here in Santa Monica, the Santa Monica police just unveiled their. So if you've seen the YouTube videos of like Boston Scientific with all of their AI animals, like the robot animals, like the
oh
dogs and all that
God,
kind of stuff,
yeah. It's frightening, man, once
the
those
Santa
things
Monica.
are
So about 2 months ago, I'm walking on the Third Street Promenade here in Santa Monica, and it's like oh God, there's almost 100 people with their cameras out, and they're all moving together, like focusing their cameras on what's going on. And the Santa Monica police like unrolled their robot AI dog, and
oh
they're going to
wow.
have those things patrolling around Santa Monica. And I'll never forget that
God.
moment. First time I saw this in public, where it's now going to be in life. And
Yeah.
I just told myself, this is going to happen really fast. I think we're going to see people, just whisked away. That there's going to be these AI machines that just fly out of the sky. They read you your rights. They put you in a compartment. They just take you off God knows where. I don't think those
Yeah.
days are far away.
Yeah. I've seen some very wild videos of kind of the newer robots and their capabilities, like doing backflips and stuff. And it's like
That's what
I
this robot
don't
that's what this
understand the
robot did.
point, but oh really?
It was doing
Oh
backflips. We were just like, oh my God, look at that.
yeah. I would like to stay away from that as far as I can.
So it's going to be very interesting how the human spirit like gets confronts and deals and copes and gets through all these things that are coming. And yeah, if
Yeah.
Jim Morrison were alive today, it would have been really amazing to like hear what his thoughts were on all of this. Being that he was somebody that talked about the rise of all of this stuff when he was alive. He
Yeah.
had this guy was like had the stuff of like the prophet like also. I'm just like really 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 amazed the person like that I discovered. It was so compelling that I'm like, this is going to be my first book. This is just,
Yeah.
I
So
was going
what
through my own spiritual awakening myself at the time. So it's like, I'm just going to get a book out of this.
yeah, I was
And
gonna ask
I
you,
was just,
when did you start going through that type of awakening yourself?
I think it started um, back in 2003. I mean, I noticed like a lot of people, I notice number synchronicities, like three,
Mhm.
4 digit numbers. And it
Yeah.
started with 333 in Santa Cruz. And then over the years, I began to notice, other numbers. I'm to the point now where I numbers mean a lot more to me than just, you know, items to, like to quantify things.
Yeah.
They have spiritual significance, and I do believe that they synchronously pop up for you to understand something, know something about something going on in your life at that time.
Oh,
So it kind of
100%.
started in Santa Cruz. It kind of started in Santa Cruz. I think I've always been a spiritual person. I mean, I grew up Roman Catholic in Miami. I mean, I was a good Christian kid for a while. You know,
Yeah, same. That's kind of how I grew up, so.
my parents wanted me to be a Catholic priest. I was like, no, I like girls. That's not, I like rock music, but I really
Yeah,
enjoyed
yeah.
the
I
like
like
the
rock and
Catholic.
roll too much.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed like the mysteriousness of like the Catholic Mass, which I realize now much of it is built upon ancient pagan rituals.
Yeah.
To my like, I learned that the Pope, like the hat that he wears, it kind of looks like a fish's mouth.
Yeah.
That's actually based on a fish god called Dagon, like ancient Egyptians. It's kind of a sign of like of abundance and to have like an abundant future and to have power. Like the Catholic Church is just like replete all kinds of these ancient symbols.
Yeah. The Catholic Church that runs deep. I mean, you could spend weeks going down that rabbit hole.
So I
Yeah.
had some Roman Catholic influence growing up, and
Hmm.
um, I discovered the Doors when I was, as I write in the book, when I was 13. What I loved about him from reading No One Here Gets Out Alive is I love to read books. Oh, this guy likes books too. This guy has like an attraction for like language and stuff like that. So that stuck with me about Jim Morrison,
Hmm.
and I could tell that I was different. And with Jim Morrison, I think like with so many people, you just find a hero when someone that is letting you know that hey, like you're you count, like you're not like an outsider because like there's something wrong with you or something like that. Like
Yeah.
it's because you're an awakened person and you have a sense of that other reality. And I think it just takes all human beings in their own way, in their own time, how they wake up.
Yeah.
And it, everybody's story is very unique. His is amazing because it happens to him like when he's 13, 14 years old and he has this incredible experience when he's three.
Yeah.
Trauma has a lot to do with it. Like when you're 3 years old and you come across like dying people on the road, that was traumatic. That's a
Yeah.
lot. It's hard for children. Well, children can't process things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's obvious that Jim Morrison spent his entire life processing that. And when we hear him talk about that on American Prayer, that's part of a conversation that like Frank Lisandro tapes when he's out there filming um, his short film, An American Pastoral, in which he tells his friends, present, and Frank Lisandro about what happened that day. And you can tell that he has given this stuff a lot of thought. Plus, when they were filming that, they came across a coyote that was dying on the road, and you can see this on YouTube.
Mhm.
And I think the dying coyote on the road just for Jim Morrison had that faculty X experience that just snapped him back into what it was like when he was 3 years old and those people were dying.
Yeah, I think
Like
trauma has a lot to do, yeah, with that type of thing. I kind of experienced like my own like awakening through like kind of losing somebody like traumatically, but so I can definitely see like how that like kind of shot him kind of in that direction.
so with the yeah with the dying coyote, like he talks about that like extensively, on this YouTube clip. Throughout all the clips that you can find about it, like one thing is just I think is gonna is obvious now since people can meet Jim Morrison this way. This is a very, very, very sensitive, very thoughtful person
Yeah.
who just had a really amazing response to life, both in how he talks to people and with his art. He felt that music and poetry was a way, for him to communicate and to reach out to other people, to not be, so much, as an outsider.
Yeah.
But this is somebody who he put his faith in the eternal because he felt that songs and poetry were indestructible. Like, you can wars will happen, everything like that, but we're still going to read Homer. We're going to still
Yep.
read poetry. We still have songs a long time ago. He put he put a lot of his faith in it. And that comes out now in all the videos that you can find about, which is cool.
Yeah. So you did an incredible job laying out, his life and how he was kind of a secret teacher through his artwork. Do you have plans on maybe shining a light on another artist, or do you have plans for another book coming up?
I think in the future, I would like to look into the life of another hero I love, Neil Peart, the late drummer
Oh,
for
very
Rush.
cool. Yeah.
He was also somebody who had strong mystical side to that other reality. I mean, when you
Wow,
look
I
at
had no
songs like Mystic
idea.
Rhythms, that yeah, he wrote most of the songs, the lyrics. He was an
Really?
avid reader. Oh yeah, and besides being an absolute like brilliant percussionist, the songs were the melodies were a lot of them had to do with what was going on in his mind. And so I saw similarities in which, well, a relationship which Morrison's like the Dionysian, whereas like Neil Peart is like the Apollonian, like Apollo with the chariot.
Yeah.
You know, that's how he is that with the drums, like with Rush. Nevertheless, it still has strong elements of the shamanistic because it is drums. With poetry because he wrote the lyrics, and with mysticism and the occult and everything has to do with that because the themes are all over the place in all of
Yeah.
Rush's music. And he took trips to China and places like that, and what we call sacred sites. So I would like to look into his life. I think I had great Rush experiences also. Saw him
Yeah,
five
dude, I
times.
love Rush, and honestly, that's something I didn't know about Neil Peart. I mean, he's an incredible drummer. Honestly, everybody looks at him as the best of all time. I tend to agree.
I
Uh,
was sad when he passed away. He was only 63 when he passed away a few years ago. He
yeah, I
didn't.
didn't see that coming.
Nobody knew that he was sick. They kept it under wraps, but he was suffering for a good 3 years before he passed. He had a very tragic occurrence when he was with Rush, in which
What was that?
his daughter going for her first day of college, she was killed in a wreck.
Oh, mhm.
She was like I think 19, right around there.
Yeah,
And then her mother, his wife, she passed away several months later. It seems because of illness induced by grief,
yeah,
and that he was just naturally devastated beyond anything you could imagine.
yeah. I can't imagine that.
And the way he dealt with it was he loved motorcycles, so he just went on these like very extensive motorcycle trips, and then he wrote I think like 3 or 4 books about his experiences on these motorcycle trips and how he dealt with grief and trauma and pain and losing his family. But that's a very extraordinary thing to learn about how a person deals with right there.
Yeah,
A lot of people didn't know that too.
yeah. Honestly, I had no idea. I'm learning stuff about Rush right now, man. Was there anything that you kind of felt like a connection with Jim as like a songwriter yourself, going through that sort of an awakening as you're kind of doing all of this research?
Yes. So I mean naturally, like in doing the research and being determined to show Jim Morrison as a secret teacher in the Western esoteric tradition, like I really had to allow the writers that he was into and the writers that I felt like Gary Lackman
Yeah,
that could really clue me in onto creating this new vision of Jim Morrison's life. Like I allowed them to take me to school. Like I really had to work, and just by the nature of engaging in this material, like as deeply as I did, like you're gonna induce like spiritual awakening. You're gonna wake
yeah,
up like it's really gonna have an effect on you.
yeah,
You know, and I think overall, like the effect that it's had, like maybe artistically is not so much to force things like artistically to happen in like the ambitious sense,
yeah,
but just from the nature of how I wrote this book, things just kind of happened in this flower budding kind of way where you can't force anything.
yeah,
It was like just work hard and be patient for things to happen in a kind of divine time. And that was something that was very new to me
Yeah.
because I was very eager to do like X, Y, and Z. And then I realized that something is leading me. Like there's another kind of, I don't want to call them, I guess you can call them spirit guides if you want to, but
Yeah.
there's like a divine force behind all of this. Just because that's the
I
nature of who
agree.
Jim
Yeah.
Morrison was. It's like
Hmm.
if you're going to engage in the art of someone like Jim Morrison, this is what you're going to have to learn. This is Jim Morrison understood that things were just like, evolving on their own. When you there's a clip of him on YouTube on the Feast of Friends documentary, and where he tells that the documentarians that are making the film, like, we're not making things happen, like things are just kind of happening on their own.
Yeah.
The documentary is just kind of making itself. That's a very like occult, esoteric, spiritual way to look at life. To see things as just like budding like a flower.
Yeah. Falling into
It
place.
it just so I think artistically it was that's what I learned,
Yeah.
from the entire experience of writing this.
Did you see yourself like growing as a songwriter, or like did any type of did that change at all? I always learn like anytime I like dig deep into something, not like it changes me, but it's like I take a little piece of that with me like along like further. It almost becomes like a part of you in a way.
Oh yeah,
At
like
least I feel.
Jim Morrison's a brilliant songwriter. Robert
Yeah.
Krieger wrote he Robert Krieger wrote Light My Fire. He wrote like probably almost half of the worst songs. Robert
Really?
Krieger is an amazing talent in himself. With Jim Morrison was to have like a kind of an astrological look at that. Like Jim Morrison's a Sagittarius, and Sagittarians are like the people known for like being just blunt and direct. That's
Yeah.
what you need to be a good songwriter. Because I mean, poems you can be creative with words,
Yeah.
right? Songs you can't. Like with song lyrics, they need to be as clear as highway signals. So you're just gonna lose the listener.
Yeah.
So with Jim Morrison's lyrics, I mean, they they say a lot of things that are spiritual, but they're very direct. You're right there in his world. Like he has a gift for luring you in, like quickly, like break on through the other side. It's like the perfect example of that. Dig it straight, deep, and wide. He his phrases are amazing. He knows how to arrest you.
Yeah.
That's what I learned from songwriters like Jim Morrison. Also, I think what makes really cool songs is that you have to know that you know you're bringing people into a world for 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. You don't really want to go beyond 4 minutes unless you're Bob Dylan and you can really take that, right?
Yeah.
And I learned that strive for like interesting key changes, with a minimal amount of chords, like 4 or 5 chords, because
Yeah.
you're just gonna lose people,
Yeah.
that way. And then I think like the most important thing beyond just like the songwriting, the techniques of it and all that is figure out what you're meant to play. Like know your craft, learn your instrument, listen to as much good music as possible so it sticks into your unconscious what good art
Yeah.
is. But like find out who you are, journal, just have that part of yourself that's observing who you are and what you do and your habits and everything. Because if you want to create music that's going to affect, you're going to find your audience if you're writing music that you're meant to write that's authentic.
Yeah.
Other people are just going to vibe with that. Like
Yeah.
I love lyrics and I love folk music. I've gone back to like my acoustic. I'm a fool for like acoustic guitar with great lyrics.
That's
That's
all,
what I love.
who are you listening to right now? Like that kind of fall in that category.
I mean, I'm going back to all like the alt rock that I used to love, like this guy named Richard Buckner that a lot of people don't know about from like the '90s, and Dylan, of course. I'm going back into
Yeah.
like all the great folk musicians. I'm going back into like where blues came from and how that affected folk. I think it's important
Yeah.
for like if this for me, I think it's important to go back, see where the roots of all this great music came from. To explore rhythm and blues, to explore jazz, to explore bluegrass.
Yeah.
Just this stuff that comes from like the Scottish Highlands that made its way to the Appalachians, and see what this is, and um and how it fits in what you're meant to do. And also just I love lyrics. I'm a lyric driven person. That's one of
Yeah.
the reasons why I love Jim Morrison, because he
Same.
was a
Yeah.
lyric driven artist too. And that has made me go back to the poets, that I love, the writers that I love. What was awesome about writing this book is I just decided that I want to go back to the thing that I love the most, which is one of the things I love the most, which is reading good books, being
Yeah.
affected by them. And I felt for a while I was kind of depressed. Like, God, nobody reads books anymore. Now I'm just like, fuck it. There are people out there like you
Yeah.
that's gonna make all this worthwhile.
Man, I found it and I was blown away. But again, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to talk to you again.
Thank you very much. Let's do it again for sure. Thanks, man.
I want to say thank you so much to Mr. Paul Wyld for being so gracious as to be my very first guest on this podcast. Again, I highly recommend picking up a copy of his book, Jim Morrison, Secret Teacher of the Occult, for yourself or somebody that you think might be interested in it. You'll find a link in the description. And this book is not just any biography. Paul offers an incredibly fascinating new perspective on Jim Morrison, and he sheds a light on aspects of his life that not many people would do and are often overlooked. So be sure to show Paul some love, and thank you again so much for checking this out. I hope you guys enjoyed it.